Welcome back to 50 Days to Rebuild, the series where I do 50 minutes of exercise and read 50 pages of a physio book in an effort to rehab myself. This is day 18. Starting off with the cat-camel exercise slash mobilization. It's going quite well. There was some cracking today in the mid-spine, but really taking the effort to try and almost push vertebra by vertebra. Sort of eliminated that, and also slowing down was quite helpful in that effort. With the side plank, I realized I got it wrong yesterday. It's weirdly the left side that I'm feeling the glute activation, which again is quite strange. Normally when I do the side plank, on the left side I actually have to not be in like neutral with my hips almost to some extent. Like I have to bring my hips forward so I don't get that TFL strumming, or my feet forward I guess. But it's the one that's feeling like I'm getting the best activation with, and then I can almost come back to neutral from there. On the right, where I normally start in more of a neutral position, I'm struggling to get some of that glute activation. So a bit strange. Maybe I should start in the position I do on the left side, and maybe that will help. With the bird dog, I was quite sad to regress it, but it did actually go quite well today. Did take longer to try and go about everything, just working from the arms. At first, it didn't feel good. I realized I was too far over my shoulders again to get the right press, and I was sort of getting a crack through my shoulders. But particularly after fixing that and on the lower side, felt fantastic. Got me confident that it's not going to take me too long to progress back up. Just really want to shore that foundation up. I will add also that I'm realizing that, maybe to some extent it wasn't even that bad previously, because I was watching myself as I'm going and I'm like, oh, that's asymmetric. And then I'm like, my spine's not moving. Like, I'm somewhat just asymmetrically built. Like, your liver makes you asymmetric. Just in general, there's some slight variation. So, and also, like, you do have to somewhat shift to do the movement. Like, I remember the chiro that ran me through it when I was first starting said that. So yeah, I think I'll be able to get back up to it soon. The glute medius clamshell exercise feels really good. I'm keeping my spine nice and stable. It's hard to get towards like the upper end of the movement, but I think it's necessary because that's sort of more the position I'd be in doing like a glute bridge or something. But it felt good, and I was able at least somewhat to push into those end ranges. With the glute bridge, again, the first few reps always feel like I can't get it to work, but trying to activate everything by doing this like brace, glute squeeze, and then leg extension to get the quads firing, and then redoing the exercise felt really good. I was able to really minimize the hamstring activation and get actually pretty high range that I'm very excited by. Taking that learning into the hip hinge exercise, which I realize looks a bit how you're going on a video, especially after I speed it up, but it's going really well. I'm so keen for that, and I think that I'm going to be able to start progressing to some of the progressions that I listed off from my learnings, like the standing like 45-degree one, and then yeah, eventually into like essentially a deadlift, and potentially also like the single leg stuff, which would be so cool. I just chucked in a bit of wrist work here as well. I've been a little fixated on some of this Miguel stuff because I think it's so important, but I've sort of done so at the neglect of everything else, and as of yesterday my wrist started to hurt again. I don't know how many days that's been in a row that I've sort of abandoned everything else, but it sort of goes to show that they're a group that might not need like daily work, but it definitely needs to be more frequent than I have been doing. But it felt good. I actually felt like I got extra internal rotation range today, and it helped because at one point it was clicking, but once I really rotated hard, clicking went away. It felt good. Moving on to what I learned today, we finished Ultimate Back Health and Fitness today, which is really cool. I will say there was one thing in there that was a little shocking, that made me really rethink how I've been approaching things. So they were discussing generally how much your core needs to be braced, like how tight everything needs to be able to do explosive work. And I thought like it's going to have to be pretty high, and they were saying about 25% of maximum contraction. I think I'm going beyond that to walk. Like I know that I'd heard like 5 or 10%, but it's just really hard for me to feel like I'm getting the contraction. But I think I probably imagining that getting the contraction is like a really hard contraction when it's just like a little gentle pulse. So I think I really need to scale that back up for my walk, for my other exercises, because yeah, like I discussed in some previous videos, that actually might be the limiter. Like I'm over tensioning one guy wire, and then the other ones can't function properly. It's limiting range of motion. So I think I'm definitely going to work on that. A quick note, 25% was for most things. It wasn't like a hard and fast rule, but that was about what was required for most plyometric stuff. So even anything not plyo would be sort of regressed from that. On the topic of tuning the core to be the right level of activation, he said once we have that down, we want to start tuning the tension of the more distal like appendages. So like for example in the feet, he said, you know, we really want to make sure we're getting the right level of tension so things are elastic. A very interesting way they were defining like knowing that you're at the right elastic point is that you're getting more like amplitude in the movement, but also that it's essentially becoming easy because you're relying on more of the passive tissue. And so there's a few ways to build this up. So there was some sort of foot ricochet exercise, although they didn't display that. Then also some sort of pogo jumps, and then lots of like skipping drills. And in general, he said for just like any like explosive people should really prioritize those plyometrics. So like in a sprinter, for example, he said same thing. They're relying on passive tissue. Prioritize that passive tissue, and you compromise them if you stretch them beyond just the fixing, like using stretching to fix asymmetries or stretching beyond the range of motion of the sprinting itself. Like just try and keep them essentially springing in to some extent as tight as possible so that they can be good, efficient springs. There was a very interesting concept called neuronal overflow that was covered. It wasn't covered in too much depth, but I found it interesting. It was essentially saying that, like for example, if you train like one arm in strength, like let's say we were doing like a bicep curl or like shoulder flexion, and we didn't train the other side, that the other side would get stronger anyway, which is nuts. And apparently this is like in part due to getting the motor control pattern down on one side, but also that if we squeeze enough on one side, there's this sort of overflow from the neurons so that we can start getting a better squeeze through the other side, which is so cool because like if we had like an asymmetric injury or we had better activation on one side, like hypothetically then couldn't we use that squeeze as a way to start getting better performance and activation and rehab in the other side? Like, isn't that cool? Following on from some of the pulse discussion and the double pulse discussion from yesterday, Miguel was saying that you can essentially take any of the stabilization exercises and just modify them to be able to do this pulse work in. So for example, like a dead bug or like some sort of single leg squat or whatever, just to practice that pulse. Probably the most important thing here was he was discussing how to train that relaxation for the pulse. And he said the best way to do this is get into like the ready position of whatever sort of athletic position you're trying to train. And then overemphasize the isometric squeeze. So everything's super duper tight. And then let everything go as you start moving a limb, like for example in a punch. And just work on that. Once you've got that, then you work on the pulse at the end where you're connecting with something. Like for example, once they got the first pulse down, then they'll introduce a bag for somebody to punch so they can pulse, relax, pulse. So I thought that was a cool, nice, practical way of doing it because, yeah, there wasn't too much explanation prior to that. Following on from a discussion I had yesterday, it does seem that McGill is pro down and back with bench press and row, which is a bit surprising to me to hear, although it's a very common cue. I've just never found much success with it myself. But he was saying that it's a stable base for bench, and he mentioned that that's what you should do when you row, so I'm not sure how to take that. I'll keep it in mind. He's definitely someone who you should only contest if you're very confident that you've got something right, because he's a very well-researched fella, so maybe it is the right approach. On the bench, I was just really glad to hear him say something. He said something similar with squatting as well, which was it's not just bending the bar, it's spreading the bar. So like getting abduction involved. Maybe horizontal abduction in this case, but yeah, I thought that was cool. Like, I don't feel like I ever hear anybody talk about that. And he mentioned the same thing with squatting. Like, I have heard people talk about spreading the floor, but normally then they're like, yeah, to just screw your feet into the ground to spread the floor. And he did mention that, but also he's saying, no, like, spread by abducting. Like, let's move laterally. And I'm like, oh, that's so different. And that makes so much more sense because, like, I've heard, I can't remember his name now, like, elite lifter, and he's talking about like him trying to spread his taint was how he would go about doing a lift. And I imagine he moves laterally based on hearing this. Before jumping into some of the specific exercises and cases that he covered, there was something interesting he went through for like all types of exercises, which was shock waves, which was essentially like getting into the normal brace position, doing all the things he recommended, but then doing like a tiny rapid dip before coming back up. In the bench press, he said this is like a stomp. And same with the squats, sometimes like a stomp could be helpful, which I thought was cool. He said that sort of momentum and like pulses is quite helpful. Now when doing like any sort of powerlifting, like big lifts, I'm so glad this came up. I was just thinking about this yesterday. He said that when you fill up the lungs, you want to fill them up almost to full, which increases intrathoracic and intra-abdominal pressure. The reason I was so like chuffed to hear this was that at one point I was working on increasing intrathoracic pressure, not just intra-abdominal pressure in my breathing. I was told not to do this by a chiro I saw, and probably correctly for the type of exercises I was trying to achieve. But I've been curious, like if I'm stabilizing the spine with intra-abdominal pressure, why wouldn't I want to stabilize the upper spine with intrathoracic pressure? And it sounds like, well, you do actually if you're doing a stupidly heavy lift. Probably just not in everyday life. After this, Miguel ran through a few case studies that I found very informative. Some to apply to myself and potentially at some point in the future to apply to other people. So I might just jump through some of those I thought were really interesting. For a very selfish perspective on myself with climbing, which is my love, he sort of broke down, this is essentially a crawling pattern. That's what we're trying to mimic. And he discussed dynamic correspondence, which I think I discussed on this the other day, which was like one limb moves in one direction, one limb moves in the other. It's like when we're running, one goes into extension, one goes into flexion, and we really want to train that. So for example, with climbing, he said you could do a single leg squat while the other arm pulls down while the other one pushes up, to sort of get that dynamic correspondence, that movement, symmetry that's sort of required as you're climbing up and kind of crawling. A few other things he mentioned were helpful here, like trying to progress like a curl up exercise to include some sort of like crawling movement, and also to do sumo squats, because that wider stance was much more akin to being sort of as close to the wall as possible. So it sort of mimics the training space. So one of the sort of principles of Miguel's work was that you want to train how the sport actually performs. So if it's a fast sport, don't train slow, like train fast. This was within reason, like you had to train slow to be able to train fast first. But he said with powerlifters, they need to sort of do the opposite, because they're doing these maximal lifts. They need they just need a ridiculous amount of recruitment of muscle fibers. And he said the only way you're going to do that is by getting some fast training so that you can get that like fast twitch going. And then you can try and integrate that into those slow lifts, which I thought was really cool. There was also a note on people experiencing SI joint pain, especially if it was from like split squats. He said, like eliminate the split squats to start with. And then he said, focus on core work to stiffen the pelvic ring. And he didn't say, and stiffen this pelvic ring. He said, to stiffen the pelvic ring, which is very interesting to me, because that's like around where the pelvic floor attachment is. And that's pelvic floor work is something I abandoned when I started doing Big O Big 3, and I haven't had any issues. So I guess I'm curious if like training the core in the way that he has instructed, like the brace and the breathing, automatically gets the pelvic floor involved, or if that's something that in some cases might need to be specifically trained. He also said that after doing this, could potentially reintegrate some split stance work, just slowly up it and maybe have less load and less range when doing so. Now, he discussed a jiu-jitsu competitor who was often in flexion of the spine, and he said had to really take that away. And whilst many people were against it, he was basically saying that there's a balance here. If you want to be able to bear load, you need a stiffer collagen, which means you need less movement through the spine. And if you want more movement through the spine, you need a softer collagen. It's a give and take. And I thought this was very interesting, because it's essentially saying you can't have both. Although he did say like there are rare individuals who can just move their spine under load without getting injured. He said they're very rare, but again, I'm so intrigued by these people. This is the ATG people. It's like, why don't they get hurt? Are they just really slowly introducing this stuff? I don't know. I don't really get it, but yeah, that was an intriguing note. With sciatica, which is something I've definitely struggled with, although I haven't for a while, touch wood, he said that if it's a bulge, like a disc bulge is causing it, first you want to try and reduce the bulge. So for example, like doing extension work, depending on where the bulge is. for like a few minutes, just like really shallow sort of extension range, will reduce the bulge, and then you do nerve flossing and it'll be much more effective. There'll be more range for the nerve to operate in. The last thing was just around the foot angle in the squat. So I've often, for a long time, subscribed to Kelly Starrett's view of, well, if the feet are straight, I can get more torque. But what McGill was saying here is you essentially want the foot angle to align with the angle of the knee hinge. So I guess to some extent he's saying it really depends on your stance as to like your hip stance, your hip width, as to sort of what foot position you want to take. And it wouldn't necessarily have to be straight or close to, it might actually be further out. Yeah, that was the whole book. I did move on to a new book about PNF, so proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, so it's around stretching. I only got about 15 pages into that, that's all I had to go through today. It's more of the introductory stuff, so I won't jump too much into that today. I'll cover more of it tomorrow. But yeah, I'm really happy to have finished Ultimate Back Fitness and Performance. I know it was really definitely getting into that performance space that I'm not at yet. But it makes me excited for potential possibilities in the future. And there was definitely a few insights into the rehab perspective. So yeah, I think it was really worth the read. And yeah, that is everything for day 18. Thanks for listening and have a good one. Cheers.